Selkirk, a remote Scottish town nestled between misty hills and an ancient forest, had long been considered a sanctuary of peace and folklore. With its cobbled streets, ivy-covered stone cottages, and the ever-present scent of heather in the air, it felt untouched by time. In 1899, the town thrived in quiet harmony, its people simple, its seasons predictable, and its legends comfortably forgotten. That is, until the enigmatic presence of 7 sisters redefined the town's heartbeat. The sisters arrived one early spring morning, their carriage cutting through the morning mist like a ghost ship across a pale sea. They settled in a quaint, vine-entwined cottage at the forest's edge, an old dwelling long thought abandoned and impossible to restore. Yet within days, smoke curled from its chimney once more, wild roses bloomed along its gate, and the dull stone of its walls took on a warm, golden hue. No one in town knew from where the sisters had come, but their grace and presence quickly became the talk of Selkirk. Locals referred to them reverently, and sometimes warily, as the 7 Lights of Selkirk. Each sister carried a distinct presence, as if a separate thread of nature's fabric had been woven into her being. Isabel, the eldest, was a botanist who cultivated herbs that healed wounds quicker than any doctor's hand. Maura, the second-born, spun tales so vivid that listeners swore they had walked through other worlds. Elspeth brewed tinctures and teas that could quiet even the most tormented mind. Nessa composed haunting melodies that floated on the wind at dusk, causing travelers to stop and listen in awe. Fiona painted with such emotion that her subjects' expressions seemed to change depending on who looked at them. Catriona, ever staring at the stars, predicted the weather with eerie accuracy and charted constellations unseen by even seasoned scholars. And Brigid, the youngest, spent her days dreaming and sketching visions that often foreshadowed events yet to occur. Their lives seemed touched by magic. Children would wander past their gate, wide-eyed and giggling, hoping to be invited inside for a story or a sweet. Villagers would find small bundles of herbs on their doorsteps, perfectly tailored to cure whatever ailment plagued them. A widow once returned from the sisters' home clutching a portrait of her late husband, painted so precisely it brought her to tears. Another swore Nessa's lullaby was the only thing that eased her baby's nightly fits. It was as if nature itself had chosen these women, given them gifts to soothe and enchant. But the serenity they brought was tinged with mystery, sometimes awe, sometimes fear. Strange occurrences began to ripple through the town like distant thunder. Birds gathered silently on rooftops whenever the sisters walked by. Deer wandered out of the forest to rest near their garden, seemingly unafraid. Trees surrounding their cottage bore carvings, ancient symbols no one could decipher, etched deep into the bark as if by unseen hands. Time itself appeared to falter in their presence. Visitors claimed they had only stayed a few minutes, yet hours had passed in the village. Whispers grew, especially among the elders, keepers of Selkirk's oldest and dustiest tales. Some recalled a prophecy about 7 lights that would appear before the veil between worlds thinned. Others spoke of a hidden lineage of women who bore the earth's secrets in their blood, guardians of balance, meant to guide or destroy, depending on the world's need. Still, nothing could be proven, and the sisters never spoke of their past or purpose. When asked directly, they smiled politely and changed the subject. That summer, an unsettling tension took hold. The wind shifted oddly around the sisters' home. Wildflowers grew in impossible colors. A hunter claimed he followed a stag deep into the woods only to find himself back at the edge of town, with no memory of turning around. Despite this, most villagers continued to adore the sisters, clinging to the blessings they brought. Yet a quiet divide had formed between those who believed the sisters were a gift of fate and those who feared they were a harbinger of something much older and far less kind. One elder, a retired priest named Father Callum, warned that light too bright can cast the darkest shadows. He'd seen it before, he said, in places long forgotten, with people who were more than they appeared. The sisters, meanwhile, carried on their lives with calm, serene detachment. They tended to their garden, played music at twilight, and watched the stars. And all the while, The town of Selkirk held its breath, caught between enchantment and dread, unsure whether the seven lights were its saviors or its doom. On a moonless October night, a heavy fog rolled into Selkirk, so thick and low it seemed to crawl along the cobblestones like a living thing. It swallowed sound and light alike, muffling even the church bell's final toll as midnight passed. By morning, the mist had thinned, but the unease it brought lingered in the air, cold, dense, and strange. When villagers rose with the dawn, something felt amiss. Birds did not sing. The town's dogs paced anxiously or refused to leave their homes. All eyes turned instinctively toward the forest, to the cottage that had once brought them comfort. The sisters' home stood as it always had, its ivy-clad walls calm and undisturbed. But something was different. The stillness wasn't the gentle hush of sleep or slumber. It was hollow, like the air before a storm, like breath held for too long. Concerned neighbors knocked on the door. No answer. They knocked again, harder this time. The latch gave way under pressure, and the door creaked open. Inside, the scene was untouched, but eerily abandoned. Teacups still sat half full on the sitting room table. A kettle on the stove was still warm to the touch. A book lay open on Moira's chair, its pages curled slightly with moisture. Fiona's easel held a half-finished canvas of stars that no one recognized. 7 beds stood unmade, as though each sister had risen quickly and with purpose. 7 cloaks hung neatly by the door. 7 pairs of shoes were lined up just beneath, untouched, unmoved. But of the sisters, there was no sign. The village plunged into a state of quiet, rising panic. At first, they whispered. Maybe the sisters had gone to gather herbs or to perform one of their moonlit rituals. But by afternoon, fear began to set in. A search party was assembled. Dozens of villagers, joined by farmers from nearby hamlets and even a few policemen from Galashiels, fanned out into the forest. Lanterns bobbed through the trees as voices called out names that had once been spoken in joy, now shouted into a growing dread. They found no blood, no broken furniture, no trace of a struggle. It was as though the sisters had vanished into air. All except for one clue, singular and chilling. Just beyond the cottage garden, near the edge of the woods, a footprint was discovered pressed deep into the dewy earth. It was unlike any human print, barefoot, but strangely elongated, the toes slightly pointed and spread as if belonging to something not quite animal, not quite human. Some said it looked as though it had been burned into the soil rather than pressed. It led nowhere, no matching prints, no path to follow. Just one step and silence. The mood in Selkirk darkened. Rumors took root like weeds. Some believed the forest spirits, long spoken of in half-mocking tales, had reclaimed the sisters for some offense unknown. Others feared that the 7 had attempted a ritual beyond their understanding, one that had called something ancient and irreversible. A few townsfolk recalled the strange carvings on the trees, the way time bent near the cottage, and the whispers of prophecy the elders had once spoken in hushed tones. Now, even those who had loved the sisters most avoided the forest's edge. The path to the cottage grew over quickly, as if the woods themselves wished to erase the memory. Children were forbidden to play beyond the fields. Churches held quiet, trembling services, not just for the sisters, but for the soul of the town itself. Selkirk's heartbeat, once strong and steady, had faltered. Where there had been laughter, song, and healing, there was now a void. The 7 lights of Selkirk had vanished, but whether they had been extinguished or simply carried elsewhere, no one could say. Some say that on fog-heavy nights, soft music still echoes from the trees, Nessa's haunting melodies on the wind. Others swear they've seen faint lanterns flickering deep within the forest, or stars forming unfamiliar patterns in the sky. But no one dares to follow. Not anymore. In the weeks following the discovery of the underground chamber, another clue emerged, this time in the most unlikely of places. As townsfolk began cautiously exploring the sisters' now-hallowed cottage, they came upon Fiona's painting studio, a sun-dappled attic space tucked behind ivy-covered dormers. Easels stood frozen in time, brushes stiff with dried pigment, and canvases turned to the wall, as if hiding something too powerful to be seen casually. Among them was a journal, worn at the edges and stained with flecks of paint. Inside, Fiona had chronicled not only her art, but visions, dreamlike sketches of otherworldly landscapes, with skies that bled violet and oceans that shimmered without light. One drawing depicted a mirror suspended in the forest, with trees bending unnaturally around it, and in its reflection, a shadowed archway glowing faintly with stars. The figures that stood near it were elongated, cloaked, and faceless, watchers, perhaps, or guardians of the path. Her final journal entry, written with a trembling hand, read, "The blood moon calls again. The veiled ones sing just beyond the glass. Their voices echo through the roots and stone. The veil shivers. We must answer." Elsewhere in the cottage, tucked inside a cabinet lined with vials and bundled herbs, Elspeth's final sketches were discovered, botanical diagrams, more precise than any apothecary manual, showing rare plants arranged in perfect circular formations. Some were extinct. Others grew only near ancient cairns. Together, they resembled a ritual wheel, an herbal compass meant not to heal the body, but perhaps to align it with something far beyond the natural world. In Nessa's quiet music room, her final composition rested on a stand, The Hollow Wind. At first glance, it appeared to be a mournful melody in a minor key. But when examined by visiting musicologists, it was revealed to contain a pattern of frequencies matching ancient ritual vibrations, once used in pre-Christian ceremonies, said to thin the veil between worlds. The notes, when played aloud on her weathered piano, filled the cottage with a strange resonance, something between sorrow and summoning. Taken together, the pieces painted a clear and haunting picture. The sisters had not been swept away by fate. They had known. They had prepared. They were not victims of a tragedy, but participants in a calling far older than Selkirk itself. Some began to believe they had always known this day would come. Whether chosen by destiny or volunteering from a sense of duty, they had stepped into a role long forgotten, guardians of a threshold no longer myth. But not all in Selkirk embraced this revelation. As word of the discovery spread, the town's fragile unity began to crack. Some called it madness, the desperate attempt of grieving minds to romanticize disappearance and chaos. They warned that curiosity had consequences, and that obsession with the unknown often led to ruin. These skeptics feared that the sisters had dabbled in forces best left untouched, and that to study their legacy might open doors meant to remain sealed. Others, however, felt the opposite. Inspired and stirred by the unfolding mystery, a group of scholars, artists, and spiritualists began gathering regularly in the village hall. They formed a council of preservation, dedicated to protecting the texts, symbols, and artifacts left behind. Their mission, to study, safeguard, and eventually understand the truth of what had happened, before outsiders or opportunists could twist it into fiction or exploitation. The schism deepened quickly. Lines were drawn between those who sought to bury the past, to protect the town by forgetting, and those who believed knowledge was the only shield against what might come again. Families grew divided. Friends argued. The once peaceful village found itself in quiet turmoil. Some elders demanded the cottage be sealed and the text burned. Others proposed the creation of a museum or archive, where the story of the Seven Lights could live on. And through it all, strange things continued to happen. Paintings in Fiona's studio shifted slightly overnight. Notes from Nessa's Hollow Wind were heard on the breeze near the forest. Small children, playing too close to the trees, spoke of women in starlit robes standing just beyond the mirror's edge. The sisters were gone, but not forgotten, and perhaps not entirely beyond reach. The question that lingered in every heart, whether whispered in fear or wonder, was this: had the Seven Lights opened the door or simply walked through it first? Years passed. Seasons shifted. The hills grew older, and the village of Selkirk slowly adjusted to life without the Seven Sisters, at least in the physical sense. The forest, once vibrant with laughter, music, and quiet wonder, grew silent, but never empty. Children, wide-eyed and hushed, whispered of glowing lights that danced among the trees on foggy nights, soft orbs of silver or pale blue, flickering like fireflies, but moving with intention. Shepherds returning late from the pastures spoke of hearing faint lullabies carried on the wind, melodies that matched Ness's long-forgotten compositions. Travelers unfamiliar with Selkirk often reported disorientation when passing near the woods, losing track of time, feeling watched, or catching glimpses of delicate figures vanishing between the trees. And once a year, without fail, on the same October night, the sisters vanished. A strange and unmistakable thing occurred. The wind would shift, gentle but purposeful, curling through the narrow village streets. Doors creaked open without touch. The scent of lavender, rich, sweet, and undeniably out of season, would sweep through Selkirk like a soft breath. It clung to the air most strongly near the old cottage at the forest's edge. By morning, petals would often be found scattered on the stone steps, as if laid by invisible hands. Over time, Selkirk changed. The town that once prided itself on its quiet normalcy became known far and wide not for tranquility, but for mystery. Folklorists, artists, and spiritual seekers came to learn the tale of the seven sisters. Poets wrote verses about the seven lights and their vanishing. Rituals formed, quiet observances held each October by candlelight, where villagers left offerings of flowers, handwritten wishes, or pieces of music near the forest path. Children were taught to respect the woods, not fear it, but to step gently, speak kindly, and never enter alone at twilight. In time, the story passed beyond history into legend, but the essence remained rooted in the hearts of those who lived there. Some came to believe that the sisters' spirits remained nearby, guardians of the veil, protectors of balance, still watching from the edges of perception. Others whispered that they had never truly left at all, that in crossing into another realm, they had simply transformed into something more vast, more elemental. Beings of light, thought, and memory. Not ghosts, not gods, something in between. Among the sisters' belongings, Bridget's dream diary had long been preserved in the council's archive. Its pages were filled with sketches and fragments of dreams, some beautiful, others strange and terrifying. But the very last page contained only a single sentence, scrawled in trembling ink. "We do not disappear. We return when needed." That line became a quiet mantra among the believers. It was etched into stone beside the forest shrine. It appeared in art, in song, even on a commemorative plaque placed near the now-shrouded cottage. And while skeptics continued to dismiss the tales as folklore, even they walked a little quicker when passing the edge of the woods after dark. For in the hush of Selkirk's twilight, when the sky blushed gold and the trees whispered in the wind, some swear they see them. 7 tall shadows, graceful and slow, moving gently between the trees. No words are spoken. No path is followed. Just motion, memory, and meaning. Perhaps the sisters wait. Perhaps they protect. Or perhaps they are already here, walking quietly beside us, between heartbeats and shadows, until the world needs them once more.